All right, guys, it's time. Welcome back to Unlapped. I'm Nicole Briscoe. We always have Lawrence with us and Nate. And this week, look who else is here. It's Katie George.
What's
Hello.
up?
Hello.
Welcome
Real quick,
back.
remember,
Thanks. Good to see you
uh,
guys.
we've missed you. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, you have to like this video, like us a lot, leave us a comment. If you are subscribing to the ESPN, remember to look for us for more F1 content. And if you're listening, just hit us up with a 5-star review. It's very simple. Where have you been? I feel like every time, Katie, that I turn on my TV, you're at some different NBA arena, wearing some different fabulous outfit, honestly. Let's
That's
be
very kind.
real here.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I'm in the thick of my NBA sideline schedule right now, so I'm in and out. I was not capable of watching F175 live, although I know we had boots on the ground last night, so I can't wait to hear what it was like from Nate and Lawrence's opinions. But yeah, it's just been a busy spring going from college football straight into NBA, so it's good to be back with you guys so that I can finally nerd out and talk about some F1.
Wait, where are you going next?
I go to Houston tomorrow and then up to Boston, then back to Houston and then San Antonio. So a lot of Texas as of late.
That's a lot of Texas, but also a lot of fun NBA. So that's fun. I also didn't get a chance to watch F175 live. However, I have social media it to like the fullest extent. And honestly, like that's enough. Like I thought it was great. And it's like the official launch to the season and celebrating the 75th season of Formula One. But like you two guys were there from the perspective of being in the audience and being with the fans. Like, how was it?
I was so skeptical going into it. Anyone who's listened to this podcast knows probably that I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm not really into like the razzmatazz and the big show and all that kind of stuff.
No.
But it was genuinely pretty good to sit there and watch it. I don't know if it would have quite come across for people watching at home, being to see what the listeners think in the comments and stuff like that. But I really felt like being there that you were part of something special. It was something different. It's this thing we've seen since Liberty Media bought the sport, that they're going to try new stuff. They're going to put themselves out there. And I think it worked. I mean, I really do. There were a few moments that were a little bit unpolished, but when you hand over basically the production of this show in a giant arena to the 10 teams who, as has been mentioned many times before, can rarely agree on what day of the week it is, let alone what to do, in a show like that. The fact that they all turned up, they all put on a show, most of them got it bang on, I think, was fantastic. I don't know. Do you agree, Nate?
Yeah, no, I do. I think a lot of us, especially us Brits, went in there wanting to hate on it. That's just kind of the British way. It's like, hey, I'm just going to go and hate this thing straight out of the gate. And I think from the very beginning, I mean, I've got to say, I thought Jack Whitehall did a great job hosting. I think he was the right kind of tone. And I think there was a bit of a roast of some of the drivers, in terms of what he said. I think that script was actually massively watered down from what he actually wanted to go out there and say. I think F1 had to play a pretty clever game, a game there, signing everything off with the teams, which in itself is pretty remarkable. I think what was interesting as well was seeing, because they were all given 7 independent minutes and it was all down to them, as Lawrence said, we saw, because when we talked to the teams, they really weren't sure what the other teams were doing. And in classic F1 fashion, they were all keeping their cards quite close to their chest. So you kind of got a bit of an insight into kind of the psyche of some of those teams. Some went, like Sauber had like a post-apocalyptic vibe to theirs. Alpine's was kind of talking about, the tough times the year before. Theirs, I thought, was one of the weaker launches. You had Ferrari just kind of leaning straight into the fact that it was the same day as Enzo Ferrari's birthday. And then Lewis comes out and it's like, of course you do this. You had Aston Martin with the Bond theme. So it's interesting just to see where different teams are with that. And I kind of really liked it because everyone had a bit of its own identity in there. I'm sure there's reasons to dislike it. I thought the one thing with it, and maybe they can change this, is by the end, once you've seen eight or nine car reveals, the 10th one starts to feel a bit samey because ultimately a car comes out at the end of it. But the main problem with that, in my opinion, was that a lot of the cars looked quite similar to last year. There was no like drastically different livery. So it's kind of really picking at minute things there. Again, as with Lawrence, was there in the arena. And I think when you're live, you do have a different experience to if you're there. I know that people watching it were 50-50 on it, so which is totally fine as well, because I'm not sure how well it did come across on TV.
I will say, though,
yeah,
Nate, to
yeah.
that point, the clips that I saw, it did appear big from the outside looking in.
100%.
It seemed like a really big, well-organized event. And I'm all about efficiency. I know you guys, you guys had to go to 10 different livery launches. Like remembering 10 different dates, having it all packed into one night, I thought was pretty genius.
Yeah,
Well,
but also other teams have done their own thing. But like they still like Williams had theirs, McLaren has had theirs, Ferrari had theirs. So like it was in some ways, I love the idea of having this big event, but then also you run the risk of almost like watering it down a bit, where you're giving like too much access and too many different ways to get it. It's like, okay, if you're going to do F175, then teams shouldn't be able to do their own
individual ones.
Watch it. Yeah.
Like, did you feel like the individuality and the uniqueness of teams' livery launches of the past was missing from the 7 minutes that they got on stage?
I think inevitably there was a bit of that, because in the past we've seen, say, Ferrari launch their car at Fiorano, as they actually did today, the day after F175, and that being the big thing. And so, yeah, certainly teams can lean into their factories, which are incredible places, and certain circuits. A lot of teams will launch at Silverstone or sometimes at the track we first go testing at. But the big difference with F175, and which I think was another huge plus point, and in fact probably being there, that the best thing about it of all, is that you had crowd interaction. You had fans, genuine fans. I know there was, corporate tables around, and I'm sure some of the tickets went via sponsors and all that kind of stuff, but genuine fans were in the room, and they were not afraid to let each individual know exactly what they felt about them. And so it was almost like being in the Roman Colosseum. You had either thumbs up or thumbs down when certain people arrived on the stage. When Christian Horner arrived on the stage, it was the second biggest boo of the night, because the biggest boo of the night went to the FIA, which I think says so much about the sport right now and where it is. And
not even the FIA, just a logo of the FIA. No one from
no representative.
They just put a logo up, and everyone was like, they just booed it out of the building, and it was amazing to see. To Lawrence's point, like it's almost trial by public, isn't it? It's
like, who got the biggest cheer then in the room?
Lewis Hamilton by
far
a significant margin. And each time he appeared, that cheer got bigger and bigger. And I think, that really does speak to his popularity. Of course, what we have to remember is that this was a launch in London, in the United Kingdom. So Lewis Hamilton's home turf, Lando Norris's home turf, McLaren's home turf to some extent. We've got a lot of McLaren fans over here. And I think Max Verstappen was quite unfairly booed. I'm not sure if that came across on the broadcast, but you could definitely hear some boos in the building. And actually what was kind of a shame was that once some fans had done it, I think other fans kind of then piled in and felt that, actually it's okay to do this. So Max, but again, this was, like I said, this was part of the drama of it. This was part of what made it special and so different to what we've seen before, and refreshing, is that you had the fan interaction. And I think that's one thing that F1 has really tried to push in recent years, is get the fans involved, get them right up close to it. And it's succeeded in that.
And I'd love to know what you guys think about this, just as a follow up to the event. The one thing I think they do need to maybe think, if they do this again, is I'm not sure Formula One realized until right now that the team bosses are not all as popular as Gunther Steiner or a Christian Horner, because you had a lot of guys going up there. I mean, I know, I thought the James Vowles bit was super cringy. And I think Williams lean into that kind of, he's like that supercharged nerd, isn't he?
Yeah.
But there's some that have a little cult following, that's fine. But, when some of them had, you had Peter Bayer and Laura Meckies there for Racing Bulls. And then you had Andy Cowell.
You don't know who they are.
Yeah. And so a small thing, because people who are really into the sport would get that. But it felt slightly, that was the only bit that felt slightly against the whole theme of the rest of it, which was big.
It just felt like lulls.
Yeah, maybe.
To those team principals, their time just kind of lulled on.
Yeah, exactly. And
so if you give 7 minutes, it's like you said, if you give 7 minutes to every team on the grid, and basically the end result is revealing a car and 2 drivers and the team principal, it starts to get a little monotonous and boring, whether you're trotting out Christian Horner or somebody that most people probably don't recognize. Did you guys see the red carpet?
I was on the red carpet, actually, Nicole. It's the first one I've ever done. And I loved it.
I loved it too. Katie, did you see what Liam Lawson wore on the red carpet?
No,
Like,
do I want to see what he wore on the red carpet?
I don't know. Okay. So mind you, like Christian Horner is in a suit. You've got Max in a suit. Carlos Sainz is in a suit. And then here is, oh boy, Liam Lawson. Are
Yes,
those like
I did see that.
Nirvana inspired cargo jeans?
Is that a flannel?
It's also a flannel. Like he is doing his best to be Post Malone with
Yeah.
the post Nirvana vibes. Like I realize that you're new to this, but could we not do any better than
Or maybe his invitation got lost in the mail and they didn't send along the dress code.
maybe?
So we had 20 minutes with Lawson in a suite that I think was his room earlier in the day.
Okay.
And weirdly, when we went in, Liam wasn't there, and our camera guys were setting up, and his wardrobe was wide open. And we did all notice there was no suit in there. There was just like a Red Bull shirt, some hats, and then that
Outfit.
kind of that shirt he was wearing was
Get up.
actually in there. So I don't know whether there was an error or whether he just thought I'm just going to wear this. But yeah, quite interesting one. And
So
I've got to say the
I
fashion
don't
choices
hate
were
the casual look. I just
Yeah.
it didn't seem like it. Like if you're going to make your first appearance as a Red Bull driver at this massive launch, you would think maybe you would put some effort into
Yeah.
your look.
Well, speaking of look, I'll tell this story as an exclusive, and it's probably the only time I'll ever tell it on Unlapped. But our producer Tom gave me some gloves because it was freezing, and for some reason, I'm not going to say who it was. One of the team bosses came up to me, and I said, oh, you're looking very sharp, and he says, you too. He's like, nice gloves, and I looked at them, and for some reason, and I think we caught some of this on camera. We haven't published it, obviously. For some reason, I looked at him and looked at the gloves, and I was like, they're just like OJ Simpson's. And I don't know why I said that. I don't know what went through my mind. But then they said, oh, I've just finished watching that show. And I was like, these do fit me as well, like the famous.
God.
And then there was a pause, and I was like, so F170. And it was one of those moments where because I don't do that job often, I forget that literally everything is being recorded. And yeah, but they looked very fashionable. I've got to give Tom Kingham some credit because they were nice.
Also, I hate to tell you this is all being recorded as well. Like,
No,
now
I know,
you've done
and
it-
I'm fine.
Now
Yeah,
you've done it twice.
yeah. But I mean, I thought it was quite a funny moment, and it was just the moment of realizing that I just said something. But you can imagine what they looked like. It was exactly like those. So
Okay.
So
Who had? Oh, what was that, Katie?
I'm just curious with the booing, did Red Bull Labs expect to have a not so warm welcome, and that's why we didn't get to hear from either of their drivers?
I wonder whether I honestly don't think they did. I don't think they thought it was going to be like that. And yeah, interesting to hear what Nate said. I wasn't aware of that they shifted around their plans. So maybe that was part of it as well. But I mean, from the first time Max Verstappen showed up on the screen, and that was when Jack Whitehall was doing his kind of roasting of all the drivers and team principals at the start, there was a boo. So maybe they thought, you know what, we're not going to put Max up and do that. Also, it will come as no surprise to you that Max Verstappen is not a huge fan of doing these kind of events. I mean, he was very clear about what he felt about Las Vegas when, they were all paraded on the pit straight ahead of the first race weekend there. And then ahead of this one, I think he had the quote where he said, oh, maybe I'll be able that day when we first heard about it happening. So clearly it's not Max's thing. And I wonder whether Red Bull just felt, you know what, we're going to face a pretty big challenge with Max probably this year from a PR point of view, making sure he does what he's supposed to do. Why start off on the wrong foot and make him do something that he really doesn't want to do there, and potentially also get booze. So but I don't think they would have expected that badder reception. And I'm not sure Christian was expecting that badder reception because he spoke for a little while whilst being booed on the stage, which is, I don't care who you are, how tough your skin is, or how thick your skin is. That's a pretty nasty position to be in.
And there was that moment, wasn't there, when you could see he reacting to the boos. He started talking, kind of paused, and then went, "Oh, well, okay, yeah," and then carried on. So I think the fact they gave him that much time reinforces that point. You don't give someone, even if you had to shift it around, you don't give someone nearly 2 minutes on stage if you think they're going to get that reaction. I think that Red Bull were surprised about it, and I think they were quite unhappy that they said booing's one thing. They were unhappy that it only seemed to be at them. Toto went on stage, no booing. Lando did, and I think there's quite a lot of McLaren fans there actually.
But who are they unhappy with? The fans?
Yeah, I know. It's like, well, if people are booing you, maybe there's a reason. It's
Right, like that. To me, it's like if you're not like if you are Red Bull and you've had the sort of the backstory and chaos of some of the things, including Christian Horner's mess. And you've dominated the sport the way that you have, and you haven't been a popular figure in any way. Isn't that like, to me, that's just like, how can you be that like unaware of your perception in the world? Because to me, it was obvious that that was the group that was going to be the most booed.
I think Lawrence made a good point
London.
earlier. I'd love to see it in another place.
Will it move, do you think? Do you think that they would circulate it in other European cities?
It'd be a cool idea. We've got Madrid joining the calendar, so that would be,
That'd be cool.
Maybe they can move it around, but I don't actually think they would, purely because getting those teams all to London seemed to be a big enough challenge, and 7 of the teams are based in the UK. Imagine if you flipped it around and you suddenly said, you 7 not only have to do this, but you also have to travel to Spain, travel to, America, I think, would be out of the question.
Especially the timing of it right before Bahrain and all, the testing. It doesn't make sense. Do you think we'll have it again though in 2026?
Well, I don't think it's scheduled yet, unless Nate, you've heard otherwise. But I don't think it's scheduled as yet. And remember, you've got to get all 10 teams to agree, and Red Bull after that may decide that actually it's probably not the best way to kickstart your season. You're better off doing it from your factory, having your own fans there, and making a show out of it that way. So, I'd be a little bit surprised if all 10 teams agree to it again as well, because it was, a fair bit of money was laid out on some of those presentations. And that was coming out of the team's pockets. Of course, it's not part of the budget cap because it's purely a marketing spend. But even so, I think a lot of the teams went along with it because they recognized the importance of marking 75 years of Formula One. And, this season that we're going into looks like it's going to be super competitive. So it's a nice way to kickstart it. But I'd be surprised if the teams are, really wanting to do that every year, because it was a lot of effort. There was a lot of tired people at the end of yesterday. So certainly if you'd asked everyone at the end of the evening, you wouldn't have got a unanimous agreement to do it again. But maybe they'll come around to it, especially if, F1 can prove to them, look, it did this for your sponsors. You got this exposure around the world. That's the kind of thing that would I'd see, make it happen again next year.
Rough estimate, I was told, for Red Bull, 800,000 on that 7 minutes. And that's including some stuff that had to get taken out, had to get chopped and changed. So
sounds kind of cheap in the world of Formula One.
Yeah, but but if you're Red Bull and you say we did all of that just to get our team boss booed, and kind of, do we want to do it again? Bear in mind, Red Bull.
Know your situation. Like what? Yeah. That's what I guess. You're going to an event in London. That's where I'm like, you have. I don't understand how they didn't expect it.
Maybe and also, given that Red Bull, they were reluctant to get involved with the movie filming for a long time because they said you're going to make us out to be the villains. See, Max had his reluctance with Netflix, so it is in there.
They didn't have to survive for a while.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's in the back of their heads, and maybe they thought this would be different. I don't know, but
one of the things that did come out of yesterday, it feels like a scene from Austin Powers where they're like $1 billion, but like there had been the rumors that Max was going to leave Red Bull at the end of his contract and sign with Aston Martin for an obscene amount of money. Not that what he makes now is not obscene, but like, what do we know about that situation?
So it was reported by the Daily Mail in January. And to be honest, it wasn't completely out of the blue. There's been an obvious link that a team like Aston Martin, that's clearly building for the future, has very deep pockets through its owner, Lance Stroll, and the consortium that he leads that owns the team, would be very keen on bringing a driver like Max Verstappen into their team, especially as their currently driver, Fernando Alonso, is kind of getting on in age a bit, to be kind of quite polite about it. And ultimately, who wouldn't want Verstappen? And the other factor there, of course, is Adrian Newey, Red Bull's previous design genius, moved there and is actually going to join in a couple of weeks. And so there was this theory that reuniting Verstappen and Newey at one team is the quickest way to win a world championship, which of course is what Aston Martin wants to do. Now, that initial report put 1 billion on the price tag. I think it was 1 billion over the rest of Verstappen's career. So assuming he went either next year or in 2027, you'd probably be looking at over the space of like 5 or 6 years, depending on how long he would want to commit to it. But I do feel like that, as is often the case, I warn our listeners now, when you see a headline number for a contract in Formula One. It is very rare that the journalist knows exactly that is the contract, because these numbers are very closely guarded. It's usually somebody else in the sport has had a estimated, educated guess of what it is and then told the journalist. So anyway, the 1 billion figure was put on it. So naturally, Max Verstappen hadn't really spoken to any media over the winter, because that's not what Max Verstappen likes to do in his free time. He doesn't like to do it when he's working either. But, you know, turn up at F1 Live, he was forced to sit down in front of us all. And he was asked, you know, this 1 billion deal, what do you think about it? He said, well, it's a lot of money, isn't it? And then we were like, oh. And then he said, but I haven't had any contact with Aston Martin about a Formula One deal. The only contact he's had with them is because he's actually setting up a GT3 sports car racing team, and Aston Martin could be one of the suppliers to his GT3 sports car team. So make of that what you will. But according to the man himself, that's as far as negotiations with Aston Martin have gone.
I want to know which seat they're alleging this $1 billion deal would be for.
Which do you think?
It has to be Alonso.
Yeah.
I think there's a desire for an Alonso succession plan. I think that has to come in at some point. You know, the guy's 42, 43 years old. You know, if the car is good enough in 2026, I don't doubt it. Like, Alonso will be able to fight for a championship, but that's also a big if the car's good enough in 2026. But I think they have to look beyond that. And then, of course, you know, Lance Stroll and his position within the team, that's going to become particularly interesting over the coming years. The one clear point at the moment is that, you know, whatever you think of Lance Stroll, he's not the reason that team isn't winning at the moment. The reason that team isn't winning at the moment is the car isn't good enough. What will be interesting is that if they do get, or when they do get to this point when the car's good enough, is that the point that they have to jettison Stroll because he's not, you know, living up to what the team needs to be able to win championships.
Would Dad do that? That's the question I have with that, because the person who actually bankrolls the whole thing is Dad. So, like,
we've talked about this, I feel like, before on this show, where if Lawrence Stroll is going to put his money where his mouth is, right? And he's going to bring over Adrian Newey, and he's building for the future, and he says, money's not an object. I'm going to do whatever is necessary to be able to win. Well, to Lawrence's point, if you finally get a car that's capable of winning, at what point, if your son's not providing the results that you need to win a title, do you move on and you make a head decision over a heart decision? Because we talked about this. Resentment starts to creep in, and resentment's really hard to quell once it starts bleeding through your workforce. And if people are saying, well, if you really want to win, you got to do what's necessary. And we just haven't seen great form consistently, I don't think, from Lance. But I do think you can always fall back on, they haven't had a consistent enough car for him to drive, for Fernando Alonso to drive to that point, to be able to contend for the course of a season. So I hope we get that example, that they finally put together a great car, and then we see, okay, Lance Stroll, what can you do? Can you provide the results on a week in and week out basis?
I think we're all being very kind to Lance Stroll here. I think he sucks. I think I know what you mean, Katie. And the thing is that the one time Stroll could have proved that, I will give him credit, is when he hurt his hand before 2023. So yeah, and he broke his wrist in training, and you just felt that he was just missing a step that season. So if he'd gone into that season fully fit, I think we would have had a better idea. But I just don't know. I think that the thing I fear for Aston Martin from a title winning perspective is Lawrence Stroll will realize Lance isn't the guy in the car too late when they have the car.
That's the one.
And miss the window.
Yes.
So it's all well and good saying we won't know it until he gets it. But if you then get to that situation and he isn't the guy, everyone will be like, well, we knew that. And now yeah. So I don't know. And I mean, maybe teams are happy to have one clear lead driver and a guy that's, you know, I think Stroll will be able to get decent results if he's got a better car. But, you know, it's the mental aspect. We saw it with Perez. We've seen bits of it with Norris. We've seen the way Stroll has responded to setbacks. Just, you know, I just don't think he would be cut out for that kind of situation.
They need it. If they have a driver who's capable of winning a world championship, then they obviously need the other driver to hang in there to win the Constructors' Championship. And if the car is good enough, then maybe that will be the case. But you have to look at the track record that the Strolls have. And Dad has bought his son the best equipment for the entirety of his career. He's gone in and he's bought go-kart teams. He bought into Prema. He bought into all of these things to win his son the championship. And like, now he's at the pinnacle. I just don't, the track record is there. I just don't see him getting to a point where he's like, you know what, we've gotten this far. I'm going to wash my hands and I'm going to walk away.
Yeah, and also I do wonder quite how bad Stroll will be in that situation. If you've got Max Verstappen in the other car, I think you do create a bit of leeway. I mean, obviously what we're talking about here is Constructors' Championships and whether if Aston Martin get themselves into that position, would Stroll be good enough to mount a challenge in the Constructors' Championship? And perhaps, you know, Lawrence Stroll would actually value his son being in the car over a Constructors' Championship if he meanwhile had Max Verstappen winning the Drivers' Championship, which, to be honest, is the one that most people care about and is probably the one that's going to shift the most Aston Martins from forecourts around the world. So, you know, I do wonder whether, you know, Lawrence will ever make that decision and ever get rid of him. To Nicole's point, you know, he's not, you know, Lance has been good throughout his career. He's not been great, but at no point has Lawrence ever backed down on making sure he had absolutely the best of everything and pushed his son into, you know, the next step of his career. So, yeah, I wonder whether with that team, that would be enough. The question then is not so much whether it's enough for Lawrence, but whether guys like Adrian Newey and Andy Cowell, who are very motivated individuals, like really, you know, top names in Formula One engineering, whether it would be enough for them to have a situation where they built a car good enough for a Constructors' Championship and one of the drivers is the weak link that's letting them down. But, you know, I'm not quite as down on Stroll as Nate. I think this has been consistent throughout these podcasts. I think, you know, potentially
very on brand.
Yeah, when he's had you know, an opportunity, he has actually sometimes been exceptionally quick, but he's just not been consistent enough. And I do sometimes wonder whether he's got the drive and the motivation to really put in what is needed to be an absolute top driver.
Can you imagine?
Not that far off.
Could you imagine the balls it would take if you're Adrian Newey to walk into Lawrence Stroll's office and say, your son can't hack it? Like, I wonder if anybody's ever gotten to that point, and not to hit Sergio Perez with a stray bullet, but like, can Lance Stroll, and I'd be curious from all of your answers, can Lance Stroll provide better results than what Sergio Perez did for Red Bull a year ago?
Well, if you look at the gap between Verstappen and Perez last year and the gap between Alonso and Stroll last year, the gap between Verstappen and Perez was way bigger than the gap between Alonso and Stroll. Not to say the gap between Alonso and Stroll was acceptable in most teams, you know, it was still big, but, you know, that was much bigger. Now, of course, Adrian did leave that team, but I don't think it's for that reason. I think Adrian would have the balls to go into Lawrence Stroll's office if he felt about it. Because remember, Lawrence Stroll was the one that came to him. He didn't go to Lawrence Stroll saying, "Oh, please let me be a part of your team." Lawrence Stroll tried very hard to bring him there, actually made him a partner in the team. So, you know, he's got skin in the game as well, which makes his voice even more impactful within that team and powerful within that team. So I think he actually would, because, you know, that's one of the things he cares about. But I'm not inside Adrian's brain. I don't really know what he truly thinks about Lance. And obviously, at the moment, you know, if you listen to Andy Cowell yesterday, he's saying that we're lucky to have Lance Stroll. So at the moment, the company line is still very much Lance is our guy.
I do want to get your thoughts on, like, yes, a lot of the liveries are the same or very similar. Personally, I liked the McLaren camo livery that they launched, which was like the fake launch. I liked the camo. But like, do we have a favorite? Do we have like the worst one ever? Like, what are our thoughts?
I quite liked the racing balls. I thought that was, I know it was a lot of a white car, but I liked
it's clean.
It's cool.
Clean, and also it feels like the inverse of the Red Bull. You know, it looks like, you know, they had a weird brand identity like last year with the Visa Cash App, and it was all messy. This one's gone back to the roots of, we're the Red Bull team. Obviously, they're officially now racing balls, so I like that one. We'll talk about Ferrari in a sec. I still don't know if I like the Ferrari or if I hate it. I look at it 1 minute and I love it, and then I look at it from a different angle. And all I want to do is smash every HP laptop I've ever seen and just destroy it for like destroying the livery of the Ferrari.
I didn't mind it. I like the bloodier red that they went back to. I mean, look, they've got logos all over these freaking cars everywhere, and you need that HP for as much money as they're paying to pop. So I didn't really mind the white area on the back. I like that red too.
I love the red. I think the white makes the HP stand out too much. And I think people have counted. There's like 6 HP, like, because there's 2 on the wheel covers.
I thought it was 9. It's 9.
Sorry, yeah, 9. So even worse. But it's the 2 on the wheel covers. if you see it straight on, I don't think it's too bad, and then side on from a certain angle. But if there's a bit of angle up, you can see there's two on the wheel covers, and then one right on top of the halo, and then the two on the and it's just yeah, I don't know. You shouldn't be looking at the logo of an American tech company when you're looking at a Ferrari.
Yeah, in my mind, a Ferrari livery is simple. All red, apart from the wings, leave those black and paint the wheels gold. That's what they did in the 1990s. It looked amazing. I was actually looking back through some old Ferrari launch photos today, and there's one from, I think, the late 80s, perhaps early 90s, and the Pope's there giving the car its blessing before it goes out for its first lap on Piran. I was like, that is how you do a Ferrari launch. And the car just looks great. It's like dark red with black wings, gold wheels. Simple.
The John Barnard Ferraris. Yeah.
Simpler time.
Yeah.
Simpler time. Yeah.
Can I be a nerd and say that I like the battery thing at the top of the Williams car?
So here, I feel like the novelty of that's worn off. Like Williams was my least favorite car. I just thought it was very blue and very blah, and I don't think the battery is that cool anymore. Isn't that so funny? Like it just like opinions are so all over the place.
It's currently in one piece, so you get to see it. I feel like at the tail end of last season, it wasn't really in one piece often.
Ouch.
I feel like they're missing a trick with that. They should make that an LED box, and it diminishes as the race goes on. So or the closer they get to their pit stop, it goes down. So people there are like, "Oh, the Williams needs to pit."
It should be a gimmick. It should be a thing. Like there's so much potential there. But also, I like the idea of like the Energizer Bunny, and that's just a completely different thing. I don't know. Like McLaren and Red Bull, fine. Be your thing. Don't change because whatever you've got is working for you. But at the end of the day, like they were kind of boring.
I don't even get excited to see Red Bull's cars anymore or liveries anymore because you just know it's just going to be like very minute and unnoticeable tweaks.
Yeah.
Although I've got to say, I think the Red Bull, I think it's a good case of if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, it's always been a great looking livery.
But to that point, Case, you're right. Like, do you need 7 minutes to show me what I know is going to be the car? It's like, I don't think you do. So, but to Nicole's point about camo liveries, I'm always obsessed with the idea of doing like a color rush, right, for F1, where you have certain, like, look, imagine Vegas if they all had to invert the liveries. But why not have the opening race of the season? They all do camo liveries. And then at the start of the next race, they're like, here's the livery for the rest of the season. Or like, I don't know, like, or they have to do testing in camo. They get to Australia, then they reveal their, if you want to do F1 live.
And you can't have these fancy schmancy launches because.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Right,
yeah. Every sponsor listening to this has just been like, Nate, that sucks.
Laz, what was your favorite?
My favorite probably was the Racing Bulls, but I think the most improved, which I think is as important because there were some shocking liveries last year, is Alpine. They went from having very much a carbon fiber car with a few splashes of pink and blue to going full in on the pink and blue. Not two colors that I would put on my own Formula One car if I had a team, which I don't. But still, BWT is their sponsor. That's where the pink comes from, and the way they've done it, I actually think looks really quite nice.
I was supposed to have 5 whole minutes with Lewis Hamilton today. And I think I legitimately got more because of Lewis. And the one thing that like stood out to me the most was, and keep in mind, this was the first day that he was on the track in the car he will race this year. There was like this childlike exuberance to him. And this is a guy who obviously has been in the sport a long time. He's won those 7 world championships. He has every right in the world to be cynical about all of these things or like, oh, this is boring. I've been here, done this a million times. And he genuinely seems thrilled and almost humbled to be wearing the Ferrari shield. And there's part of me, the cynical brain's like, okay, how long is that going to last? But I also sort of love it because we talked about this last week. We're excited to see what happens with Ferrari. But if he brings that level of enthusiasm to this team, like it sort of feels like the sky is the limit for them.
I wonder why it was late to our print session, Nicole. It was you. You only had 70 odd journalists waiting as a result.
For the record, he was like 20 minutes late to get to me. And I was like, God, I hope they haven't forgotten about me. Like I'm just sitting here. So no, do not believe me.
No, that is typical of all F1 media, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to be an F1 journalist, you've got to be prepared to wait. But by the sounds of it, your interview was very similar to ours in that it was well worth the wait. And he is super, super enthusiastic. Like really said that this feels like something new. He said in one of Ferrari's promotional videos, but still a great quote, that he thought, having firsts in his life was over. He mentioned first kiss, like first date, first time in a Formula One car. But getting in the Ferrari, which of course for the first time was in January when he did the shakedown at Fiorano, genuinely had that same feeling for him. And he couldn't sleep the night before. When he went to put on his overalls, he got all suited up, was in the garage and thought, better just go to the toilet before I jump in the car. Went to the toilet and then caught himself in the mirror after it finished, just zipping up his overalls, and was just looking at himself thinking, yeah, God, I look good. And that kind of enthusiasm for just wearing red overalls tells you all you need to know. But I think that is so important for Lewis, because the Lewis we saw last year had lost a bit of enthusiasm about the sport. There was that awkwardness in the fact that he was leaving a team, having announced that at the start of the year, so had to go for a whole season with everyone knowing that he was departing at the end of it. And I think he really needed something new, something fresh to reinvigorate him. Up 40 years old, I mean, I'm only a couple of years behind him, but still at that age, I think, you genuinely do need something to make you want to continue doing what you're doing. And he's got it all. And I'm so excited to see what Lewis we get out of this. But I genuinely believe it's going to be the best Lewis. The only thing is that he told us as well, it's a huge change. Changing teams is actually probably perhaps a bigger step than he'd realized, because he'd done it before, but it's a big step to be able to get up to speed straight away. So that's the only kind of slight cautionary tale from our media day today, is that it is.
He also said something to the effect of, like, one of the changes is like the way that they communicate with him, the way that they describe things compared to the way that not just Mercedes did, but McLaren did before that. He said it's like speaking an entirely new language, how things show up on the dash. And he said there is a steep learning curve, and he's been trying to get used to that. But he was like, he's like, driving the car is the same, but everything else is new, from the people and all of that. And you have to also remember, like, he did have that lame duck season. Like, we knew he was going to Ferrari, but he's only really had 3 weeks of an off season before then January rolls around and he's like officially a Ferrari driver. So there's really not much time between the time it officially happens and there's the time that he's in the building, and he's not in the building every day because he does have other commitments. So it's a small window to get caught up and up to speed on a million different changes.
There was a moment yesterday as well, just on everything being different, where being on the red carpet, we were right up at the front end, and when Lewis arrived, it was like one of the Beatles. Is that
a humble brag, by the way? Oh, we were right up at the front end.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, it is. For anyone listening,
you can field, were you?
Hate away for anyone listening, because that was massive humble brag. But when Lewis turned up,
were you wearing a flannel, Liam Lawson? Were you wearing a flannel?
If I'd known that was acceptable, I totally would have worn that.
With his OJ gloves.
Yeah, it would have been a good look. There was like this rush of the Mercedes guys towards Lewis, and they went, George and Toto and Kimi Antonelli went up to him, and and he looked just so happy to be there. But then George came straight to us after that to talk, and he said, this is the first time I've ever seen Lewis wearing a tie. He was wearing the very corporate Ferrari suit, the kind of lapel badge and tie, and he was kind of joking, but it was interesting to see, because you usually expect to see Lewis at those things, coming down in an outfit that makes you go, wow, like, look at Lewis today. And he and Charles were dressed exactly the same. And I loved that even Lewis is like, no, I'm gonna absolutely rock the Ferrari look. And him and Charles look great, just turning up like that. Because some of the guys look like they just kind of come off of a school trip and taking their ties off. But yeah, it was just interesting in that sense that all three of the Mercedes guys I talked to him about, George, Kimi Antonelli, and to Toto, all said you can tell how excited he is about it. And you can tell Mercedes, I'm sure they're going to regret him leaving, and they have, they've got their own feelings about that. But you can tell they're actually quite, in the same boat as you, Nicole, thinking that he does seem to have this kind of new lease of Formula One life. And it's quite nice to see.
I feel like that's sometimes a general consensus with older athletes. Like, you see that with NBA players when they get traded, or NFL players when they sign in free agency. Like, sometimes they just need a change of scenery they need a new environment to be able to thrive in, and it allows them to fall back in love with the game or the sport. And I feel like we're getting that from Lewis, and I just hope that he's able to reap the rewards of that and we're able to see results. Because when Lewis isn't competitive, I think Formula One suffers to a degree because he's obviously such a talent.
I also really liked the fact today that he was talking about the fact that, like, driving for Ferrari and sort of echoing what Lawrence had said about, like, he caught a glimpse of himself in his overalls and he saw, not just the red, but he saw the shield. And he said, like, he thought about that moment and, like, for his entire life, like, it was a dream of his when he was, younger and in go-karts, like, someday I'm going to drive for Ferrari. And he made a comment to me today about how, like, he's really glad he didn't give up on that dream, even though for a lot of people, like, it didn't make sense for him to leave his home. It didn't make sense for him to leave a place that was entirely comfortable, but he wanted to chase after this dream and this new opportunity and something that he, like, really, really wanted to do. And he talked a little bit about how he hopes that, like, some of, like, the younger people in his life, like his niece and nephew and his godson, about how they can take away from it, like, lessons about how it's important to dream even after you've accomplished something, or it's important to dream even when you think you've already, like, missed your opportunity. Like, it seems so simple, but I also think that that's where some of that childlike exuberance is coming from, because it is, like, for him, it's like his Christmas morning,
Well, another telling thing from our interview that we did with him was that he was asked about 2021, which, of course, with Lewis in recent years has been this shadow cast over everything that's happened since, and with Mercedes, and they never quite got back to it. And yeah, talking about this renewal, this kind of taking your chance and going with it, he said that he wouldn't actually, or he's not seeing the pursuit of a Ferrari title as his 8th title. He's seeing it as his first title with Ferrari. And that's quite a big distinction, because, he really is seeing it as this reset in his career, this point at which he goes and pushes on, and his desire as well to bring a title to that team, which hasn't won a championship since the Constructors in 2008, hasn't won a driver's title since Kimi Raikkonen won in 2007. His desire to bring a title there and have it as his, Lewis Hamilton's, first Ferrari title was a big thing, and a point that he was quite keen to hammer home.
Did you guys talk to Charles at all too?
Yeah, we did. We had some time with him. I felt a little bit sorry for him because most of the questions were about Lewis and not about his own season coming up. But I think he's relishing it. He really is, because it's an opportunity to go up against the best.
Yeah, he said that to me too.
Exactly. And he's gone up against Sebastian Vettel, 4-time world champion, and come out as the stronger driver. He's gone up against Carlos Sainz, a driver that we may never know how many championships potentially he had in him, because he's gone the wrong way down the grid rather than stayed at the front. But now he's going up against, pretty much undisputed, the most successful driver in Formula One. Okay, championships, he's level with Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, but race wins, he's ahead. So he can measure himself against the very best. And in a position where the spotlight is really on Lewis. And so Charles can, get his job done. What I found interesting, and I think three of us have all picked up on this in our various times with Charles over the last couple of days, is that he and Lewis have actually been playing chess online in between their various commitments, whether it be at the track or with sponsors or, photograph days or whatever. And they've been playing chess against each other. And Nate, you said that when you talked to him last night, Charles was winning.
Yes, well, that was according to Charles. Charles was saying I'm beating him, and that would have been Tuesday night. Yeah,
Tuesday night. So by Wednesday afternoon, Lewis,
when I spoke to him, he was
got 2 back. Yeah,
he was down 1.
So it's tight.
Yeah, it was a tight battle. So Charles said he was down 1, but, like, seconds before our interview had begun, he was like, "I just got a rematch request from Lewis," and he's like, "I have to win this one to pull even again."
That's how competitive these guys are. Everything
which
between
could be
them
dangerous.
Could
be dangerous. Like, we talked about that. Like, they have to be able to balance that. I did think, like, when you have conversations with somebody, you're like, you walk away with 2 things. You're like, well, 1, he's an enigma. And then 2, you're like, he's wise beyond his years. Because I did take time to talk to him about his season, and considering where he was last year, particularly what was, like, from Monza on, and how well Ferrari did. like, what are his expectations, just given where they were last year? And he was like, I have no expectations. He said, one of the things that I have learned over the last couple of years is to go into a season expecting nothing. He said, when I did go into a season and I was expecting success, I was expecting things to happen and they don't go according to plan. He said, there is a sort of nosedive that you can take. And he said, it sort of unravels. And he's like, so if I go into a season and I expect nothing, no matter what happens, I'm better equipped to deal with it, like mentally. And I was like, how do you, because I feel like, and I said this to him, I was like, I feel like having expectations about anything is a human experience. So like, how do you train your brain to not expect things of people, of yourself, of experiences? And he was like, I just don't want to be disappointed. And so then I just work from there to not be disappointed. So then I was like, okay, so like, what's the biggest challenge between now and the first race of the season? And he was like, avoid the unexpected. I was like, who is this?
That's what Ferrari's done to our boys.
I was going to say, he's experienced a lot of disappointment if he has to go to a place where he expects nothing. And that's kind of sad.
I know. And I was like, wait, hold on. Like, who are you? You're 27. I don't want to expect I don't want to expect anything and expect the unexpected. Avoid that. I'm like, okay.
What's interesting as well, Nicole, is speaking to Mattia Binotto previously, and I think Fred Vasseurs hinted at this as well, is that Charles was a real big advocate before they signed Lewis of Ferrari getting them. You know, you often wonder, you know, is this driver that happy with this guy coming in? From everything you hear from behind the scenes, Charles was always like, I want Lewis here. And I think that with that mindset he has, even if it's expect zero, I think that he's seeing this as this will prove to both the team, but also to myself, just how good I am. So I think in his head now, he's kind of like, well, we'll see. Like, you know, there's no, I think the expectations will still be high, but I think he's doing that to himself because it's like, this is probably the most important season of his career. You know, if you look at all the years that have gone previously, this one will tell us the most about him. So I've always found that quite interesting that Charles was keen to do that because a lot of drivers wouldn't. And yeah, but I'd never heard him say that, Nicole, before. So really interesting. And hard not to root for Charles as well, which is what makes that dynamic so fascinating. It's kind of almost whichever one of them comes out on top, I think is a great story, which isn't always the case, obviously.
You guys have any last thoughts?
No, just I can't believe it's like 3 weeks till the first race now. We've got to go to Bahrain, which is always kind of a bit deflating. I'd just rather go to Australia and just start qualifying.
Which one of you is going?
I'm doing testing, and then coming back, and then we're both doing the opening race in Melbourne.
It's just good to see you all.
I know.
Good to see you again, Katie.
This is the whole game. Try to work it into your busy schedule. Like, don't forget about us little peons when you're gallivanting everywhere.
I gotta get all the deets always.
I'm always excited as well for our predictions league to get going again. I don't know who won last year. I think we.
Oh wait, that's a thing.
Yes, it is.
Do I get to play this year?
100%.
You have to predict P1, P2, P3, and if you hit the trifecta and get all three right in the exact order, then you get an extra point.
Oh, I'm gonna be terrible.
Baz starts hot and then fizzles. Nate's consistently bad, and I surprise people.
Bad. Yeah, I'm
there we go.
So now you've got to carve out your brand in the predictions.
I think I'll probably just be awful the entire time. I'm terrible at this time. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, like the video, leave a comment because obviously you love us. Don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for all of the F1 content. We got your back all season long. And if you're listening, just hit us up with a 5-star review. And remember, we're back next week. Guys, thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Cheers.